Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And the climate, it is a changing. Darn it. Quick note, I'm going to have to give my little Wi-Fi extender an A, because I have had zero problems since I started using it. I actually used it for the Kevin Hester interview with very minimal glitches. So it seems to be working, which makes me happy. That should make you happy too, I guess. Got some articles to read for you tonight. Excuse me. But I want to read some comments. As always, really great comments. I don't have time to read them all or read them aloud. All of them aloud, all of the ones that I would like to, but I try. I try and try. This one is from Blue Gold 21. And he says, or she says, I don't know. They say, climate change has become a subject that needs investigating by more than one ology. People need to recognize that growing realm of interest. What I mean by that is that psychology doesn't usually involve itself in geological events, but global warming, as suggested by the term, is global. It is the stuff of science fiction, and people can't quite cope with or believe that extreme scenario, or they truly believe Tommy Lee Jones will arrange a solution to save the day. But the psychosis doesn't stop at the layman. The world leaders, have been ignoring the issue and allowed the oil companies' best promoter in the form of Trump, who knows that climate change is real and man-made but tells people it isn't, to upstage everyone, including Mr. or Mrs. Reason. It's Orwell's worst nightmare, but as the majority of people have not read his literature, they can't frame the problem and instead stay with the buzzline coming out of Washington. After all, why go against those who are supposedly charged with their protection? But that is a complete fallacy. The oligarchs are disgusted by the layman and will gladly see us fall to the side as long as the slaves are enough in number to carry their fortunate families over the hot, dirty ground. We are not just being led, but given no choice in our walk to death. It's the perfect Pied Piper metaphor, and Trump followers are no better than war-ravaged France's Vichy. I thought that was an excellent comment. Covers a lot of ground. I was just thinking today about, I don't know if anybody's heard I don't know if this is myth or true, but apparently when settlers or conquerors or imperialists first came to the United States, and that they surprised the native population here because they didn't see the boats coming, because they didn't have any experiential reference to put that, to understand what they were seeing. So they just they couldn't see them, is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if anybody has ever heard this story or not. And I also heard something similar about in earlier music was very simple melodies. And so when the first pre-classical music was invented, which had very, more dense chordal structures, people couldn't hear the complexity of the music because they didn't have any experiential, frame of reference to understand what they were hearing. That to some people it sounded discordant or like noise, like they just couldn't And, you know, if you've heard music like that, possibly some youngsters might be listening to, and it sounds like noise to you, that's because you don't have any experiential reference for it. And in that way, it's kind of how people are thinking on some levels about climate change, but about other things as well. Like if you, we are so deeply propagandized and so deeply programmed and so deeply brainwashed to think about our life in a certain way that if anything goes against that programming, we tend not to see it, right? And some call it choice or willful ignorance. I think on some level, it's just especially climate change, something that's so overwhelming, such a huge, like the idea that we would just not be here anymore, for some people might be experientially just something you just don't have any framework for it. So there's no way to grasp it. There's no way to see it, right? The way that we can see it on this channel. We can see it. Other people just can't see it because I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I won't do that anymore. But you understand what I'm saying. So it's just an interesting and very troubling and very huge problem. And I guess that's, part of why I'm here, and part of why we're all here is to hopefully put some kind of framework around this problem for people. The more framework is built, the more understanding is built, the more people can see it. Anyways, moving on. I'm going to move on because I think I've spent a lot of time talking about that one particular thing, but maybe not. I don't know how much time I've spent. This is from Deacon G, 1959. The majority of people either don't want to hear it or are in absolute denial. They do not want to understand that the entire system of complex systems that keep their world going are about to collapse. Just proving what I just said. I have to be very selective about who I talk to about what's really happening, and most people are holding on to their particular ideologies, and they don't want that disrupted. As I've mentioned before, I believe that the Three Musketeers collapse of the financial system via the derivative bomb, climate change, and peak oil are going to impale a whole lot of people before it's over. And the majority of them aren't going to be acting rationally when it finally hits. Do I believe there's another way? I do. But at the same time, there's tons of people who would rather insist that everyone has to die, and I have to be careful about some of my ideas as to how we can recover this or at least mitigate it, because I get tired of having people tell me it doesn't matter and let's just all die now because we deserve it. So I have just come to terms with what I see coming. I'd much rather light a candle versus curse the darkness. But with the dichotomies I see, well, fuck it. Life will go on until it doesn't. And indeed, we see all kinds of reactions, there's a huge spectrum of thought. And I think it's important for people to understand that there isn't just one side or this side. There's actually a lot of gray, and there's actually mostly gray, and the black and white are but we find ourselves with this, oh my God, fuck it, it's all over, or, we're going to make it, or, again, what I was referencing the other day in the article about, they referenced the wizards and prophets dynamic. And it's not either or, it's a little of everything, a little of both. And that's okay. That's a good thing. There was a reply to this comment, and I really liked the reply a lot. This is from Proud Hun 100. Deacon G 1959, maybe you can get into a situation where you say, we all have to die because we deserve it. However, I think a lot of people get to that position because they look around them and see that nobody seems willing to do anything to change the course of current events. The natural inertia that protected humanity from climate change for so long now seems to be working against us. Hence, my pessimism about human prospects. Even establishment scientists like Michael Mann, while decrying the hopelessness allegedly encouraged by the likes of Guy McPherson, are proposing nothing can change things except for some vague targets. Nothing to change things except for some vague targets for reducing carbon dioxide emissions at a future date. But let's, for a moment, consider one area of policy where human actions threaten human extinction: nuclear weapons and US-Russia relations. Things have gotten steadily worse for many years under presidents of both parties, tearing up the AMB Treaty, $1 trillion upgrade to the US strategic nuclear arsenal, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Ukraine, holding war games a few miles from the Russian border, deploying NATO weaponry within artillery range of St. Petersburg, and so on. Yet when Trump holds talks with Putin, the reaction from the liberal left can only be described as utterly demented. No matter how bad Trump is, it seems sensible to me to talk to Russia and diffuse the present situation. We are closer to an all-out conflict than at any time during the first Cold War, and yet liberals like Whoopi Goldberg seem completely oblivious to the fact that she will perish along with everyone else the moment those missiles are launched. Unlike with climate change, there seems to be some very real and simple steps that can be taken by humans to bring about peace, and yet we are headed in the exact opposite direction. Very insightful comment from Proud Hun. Thank you for that. Indeed. The inability to comprehend, or the inability to see even the other side of the aisle of like, we now, Trump is, doing a whole lot of crazy stuff. Is clearly not good for the environment on any level. Clearly not good for so many things in this country. But the thing is that the way in which the liberal left has been basically like zapped over and over again, like, you must hate everything Trump does. There is nothing he can possibly do. There is no redeeming quality ever whatsoever about Trump. He is just the epitome of everything that's horrible and terrible, and he's the ugly American personified. He's pretty close to that, but the idea that he cannot do anything good is not really logical. On that he might, not wish to do some good in the world, even, however misguided that might be, isn't really logical. I mean, even like murderers in prison, like, have redeeming qualities. You don't really want to hang out with them, but, the fact that they, a murderer in prison could possibly write some beautiful poetry, or, find themselves or find God and find a way to make, something good out of their lives. Like, that's possible. But the way in which we, the liberal left thinks about Trump is actually rather dangerous, because you just cannot accept anything good from him whatsoever. And so that puts you in a situation where you have an inability to actually see reality. You cannot see what's happening. You cannot see what's coming, and you cannot see things clearly enough to actually think rationally about them, because you have this thing in front of your plank, if you want to use a religious term. And it's not good. And the conservatives think the same way. So, I mean, I'm not just pointing out the liberal left. There are people on the right that are completely demented about everybody on the liberal left, that, that they're all out to kill us and they're all communists. Oh my God, they're going to come take over, and the, you know, cultural Marxism and blah, blah, blah. Like, just, you know, it's all, they have their whole insanity going too, that they can't see the left as having any redeeming qualities or value. All of this is dangerous. All of this is terrible, terrible thinking, and terrible way, you know, a terrible way to confront reality, if that's really what you want to do. Anyways, moving on. I really want to do a political video, and I just don't have time. And although it's just not important, but I mean, I'm itching because I just wish I had more time in my day and my life, and this is much more important. Moving on to some articles. This is very scary, and I don't, was this Christopher that linked this? Maybe it was, no, it was sent this to me. This is from trust.org. Weather woes ravage Europe's wheat fields. Markets race higher. Bullet points. Heat wave, dry weather hit Northern Europe and Black Sea. Ravages wheat crops in Germany, Scandinavia. Quality in an increasing worry in top exporter Russia. European wheat prices at 3.5-year highs on supply concerns. European soil moisture map. So this is from August 2nd. Scorching temperatures have devastated wheat fields across Northern Europe, while a combination of dry conditions and extreme rain in the Black Sea breadbasket have sunk output estimates, with fears of further damage causing prices to soar. As harvesting heads north in Germany, the European Union's second largest wheat producer behind France, more evidence of serious damage to crops is emerging, prompting observers to cut crop estimates repeatedly for the 28-member bloc. The situation is catastrophic in Northern Europe, Strategy Grains head analyst André Defoy said. The consultancy last week cut its forecast for this year's soft wheat harvest in the EU, collectively the world's largest wheat grower, below 130 million tons, a 6-year low. And Defoy said it could revise the estimate again. France, the EU's top producer, also experienced extreme weather, prompting forecasters to cut their crop estimates to around 34 million tons from 36.6 million harvested last year. Sweltering heat also dented wheat in Scandinavia and other Baltic states, with Sweden's wheat crop seen falling 40% on the year. Holy free holies. And in Britain, where drought hit wheat crops are expected to fall to a 5-year low, farmers were anxiously awaiting results as the harvest moved north. European wheat prices have surged 15% in the past 3 weeks, hitting their highest since late 2014 on Wednesday at 208.5 euros per ton, as worries mounted about global wheat supplies. A bottom line impact is also being felt globally, with overall output seen falling to 5-year lows. The International Grains Council said last week, after lowering its forecast for the EU's top 4 producers, France, Germany, Britain, and Poland. The wheat market rally is reviving memories of the 2007-2008 season, when surging grain prices prompted a food crisis, but analysts say high stocks and other grain crops could compensate for part of that shortfall. World wheat prices are a powder keg looking for a match, ag resource analyst Dan Bassi said on Twitter. A further rally in wheat could eventually inflate consumer prices, said Abdulreza Abbasian, chief economist of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. However, overall impact should be curbed by reasonable stocks from a hefty 2017 harvest. Germany's wheat crop, wilted by the highest May temperature since 1881, is expected to shrink 25% this year, Farmers Association DBV said. Germany's wheat crop, read that? It has also led to calls from the DBV for around 1 billion euros in drought aid. Crops were not as badly hit in France, where harvesting had already started as the heat wave hit. French wheat exporters are now seen as the main beneficiary of the neighbors' weather woes, while U.S. farmers could also benefit. potentially toppling Russia as the world's leading exporter, analysts said. Black Sea rains. In the Black Sea region, crops have been hurt by both dry weather and pouring rain, hitting grain quality. Quality concerns are key in Russia, as it means less wheat of milling or bread baking quality to offer on world markets. It is basically clear that the harvest will not reach last year's record, but is still going to be relatively large, said Arkady Zlochevsky, head of the Russian Grain Union. The problem is mostly related to quality. Strategy Grains sees the Russia wheat harvest falling 18% this year, Dufoy said. Russia harvested a record 85.7 million tons of wheat crop in 2017, durum wheat included. In neighboring Ukraine, which exports the vast majority of its output, the wheat crop was seen falling up to 16% to 23 million tons after a spring drought and torrential rains in the summer, the country's farm minister said. Output in Romania, the EU's third largest wheat exporter, should fall at least 20% on the year. Laurențiu Baciu, president of the Farmers Association of LAPAR, said, with large swaths of the crop completely damaged. Output drops could be even bigger than that. Day by day, that percentage is increasing and situation in the field is degrading, he said. Rains have not stopped for a single day. Moving on, this is from The Guardian. Unsurvivable heat waves could strike heart of China by the end of the century. Another dubious end of the century claim. This is from July 31st. The most populous region of the biggest polluter on Earth, China's northern plain, will become uninhabitable in places if climate change is not curbed. The deadliest place on the planet for extreme future heat waves will be the North China Plain, one of the most densely populated regions in the world, and the most important food-producing area in the huge nation. New scientific research shows that human heat waves that kill even healthy people within hours will strike the area repeatedly toward the end of the century thanks to climate change, unless there are heavy cuts in carbon emissions. The spot is going to be the hottest spot for deadly heat waves in the future, said Professor El-Tahir at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, U.S., who led the new study. The projections for China's northern plain are particularly worrying because many of the region's 400 million people are farmers and have little alternative to working outside. China is currently the largest contributor to the emissions of greenhouse gases, with potentially serious implications to its own population, he said. Continuation of current global emissions may limit the habitability of the most populous region of the most populous country on Earth. The new analysis assesses the impact of climate change on the deadly combination of heat and humidity, which is measured as the wet bulb temperature. Once the wet bulb temperature reaches 35 C, the air is so hot and humid that the human body cannot cool itself by sweating, and even fit people sitting in the shade die within 6 hours. The wet bulb temperature above 31 C is classed by the U.S. National Weather Service as extreme danger, with its warning stating if you don't take precautions immediately, you may become seriously ill or even die. The research published in the journal Nature Communications found fatal wet bulb temperatures of 35 C would strike the North China Plain repeatedly between 2070 and 2100. Unless carbon emissions are cut, Shanghai, for example, would exceed the fatal threshold about five times, and the extreme danger wet bulb temperatures would occur hundreds of times. Wow. So does it, what happens before we get to hundreds of times? It only takes, one or two times, right, to wipe out a lot of people and to have bad things happen. Even if significant cuts are made, the extreme wet bulb temperature could exceed many times, would be exceeded many times. Previous research by El-Tahir and colleagues showed that the Gulf and the Middle East, the heartland of the global oil industry, will also suffer 35°C wet bulb temperatures, heat waves beyond the limit of human survival if climate change is unchecked, particularly in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Doha, and coastal cities in Iran. Bad news is that those are going to happen whether climate change is checked or unchecked. It's still going to happen. We're not building any, huge wind turbines in the Arctic last time I checked. So that's happening. The fatal 35°C wet bulb temperature was almost reached in Bandar Mashar in Iran in July 2015, where 46°C heat combined with 50% humidity. So this has already happened, or almost happened. The scientists also analyzed South Asia in 2017 and found it too is at risk of killer 35°C wet bulb temperature heat waves in places. Even outside the extreme hotspots, 3/4 of the 1.7 billion population, particularly those farming in the Ganges and Indus valleys, would be exposed to extreme danger levels of humid heat towards the end of the century. But China's northern plain is set to be the worst place, said Al-Tahir. The response to climate change is significantly larger than the other two regions. Signs of that future have already begun, with the study finding a substantial increase in extreme heat waves on the plain in the past 50 years. In 2013, a severe heat wave in the region persisted for 50 days, during which Shanghai broke a 141-year temperature record. Professor Chris Huntingford at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and not involved in the study, said, the research finds that if greenhouse emissions continue at current levels, there will be many more days when unsafe thresholds are crossed. This will make work outdoors almost impossible across much of the agricultural regions of China. Work like this is especially useful as it allows governments to plan better future agricultural practices, including what is needed to support farmers to operate safely and thus ensure food security, he said. The most extreme temperatures in the analysis were found in the Gulf, but those occurred over the sea. In the case of the North China Plain, Al-Tahir said, this is where people live. Climate change is a key driver, but the massive irrigation used on crops on the North China Plain was found to be significant too, adding about 0.5°C. Climate change is about to the high wet bulb temperatures. This is because the evaporation of irrigation water leads to higher humidity, and because water vapor is itself a powerful greenhouse gas. The scientists did the analysis by running detailed computer models for the past 30 years on the North China Plain. Those models that closely replicated the actual measurements were then used to project the climate of the region from 2070 to 2100 for different levels of carbon emissions. Even with cuts in greenhouse gases, Al-Tahir said public health measures would be needed in China, such as air-conditioned shelters and education of the population about the dangers of extreme heat. Yeah. I mean, I really hope that it's 2070 or 2100. I really hope that, but the science is not telling us that. It's telling us it's going to happen much faster. How many scientists are moving in the direction of Guy McPherson? Almost any scientist. I hear Paul Beckwith sounding a lot more like Guy McPherson these days. I hear Michael Mann sounding more like Guy McPherson these days. At least embracing some of the things that he's been saying, like, oh, yeah. And when you realize that, that it's very bad things afoot. How many people reference Sam Carana's work? Quite a few. And Sam Carana's work looks much like Guy McPherson's work. Just saying. Yeah, so here's some news about some great things, as in really super terrible things that Trump is doing to the environment. This is from the Huffington Post. Don't see a date on this. Trump, I think it's today. Trump proposes gutting fuel economy rules and giant giveaway to big oil and automakers. This might be the Trump administration's most destructive climate policy yet. This is by Alexander Hoffman. The White House proposed dramatically weakening fuel economy standards on Thursday, reversing the only major federal policy to reduce planet warming emissions from the nation's top source of greenhouse gas pollution. The move would clear the way for vehicles to, by 2030, spew an additional 600 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, equivalent to the entire annual emissions of Canada. The widely anticipated proposal from the Environmental Protection Agency, where they're doing so much protection, and the Department of Transportation, outlines what environmentalists see as a worst-case scenario for vehicle emissions. In April, then EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt declared a landmark Obama-era regulation bringing U.S. fuel economy rules in line with the rest of the developed world. Wrong, calling the standards too high. The regulation, which automakers agreed to in 2012, required passenger vehicles to average 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025, nearly double today's standards. If fully implemented over the course of the program, that rule would have reduced oil consumption by 12 billion barrels, halved tailpipe emissions, and doubled fuel efficiency, saving consumers $3,200 to $5,700 in gasoline costs over a vehicle's lifetime. Instead, the new Trump administration standard aims to freeze 2020 standards through model year 2026. And in a break with Republicans' rhetorical reverence for states' rights, the proposal would revoke a waiver allowing California to set its own vehicle standards, a long-standing provision in the Clean Air Act that grants special status to the Golden State, which is particularly prone to air quality problems. We are delivering on President Trump's promise to the American public that his administration would address and fix the current fuel economy and greenhouse gas emission standard. That's an interesting word to use there. EPA acting administrator Andrew Wheeler said in a statement, the 978-page proposal, which accuses California of being disproportionately focused on greenhouse gas emissions, marks a major victory for automakers, which profit handsomely from gas-guzzling vehicles, and oil producers, which risked losing trillions of dollars in revenue to the burgeoning electric car industry. Automakers had scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal-struck EPA's decision to reopen the emissions rule, insisting they supported stronger standards. Ford Motor Company's top executives had even called for an increase in clean car standards in a blog posted titled A Measure of Progress. But executives from the auto industry's top three trade associations flanked Pruitt at a press conference in April, praising the decision. For them, the announcement capped more than a year of lobbying. Of course it did. The Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers began preparing to demand a break on fuel efficiency standards in the midst of the 2016 presidential election. Last year, the group, commonly known as the Auto Alliance, spent $8.1 million on lobbying, a nearly 9% increase from the previous year, according to data collated by the Center for Responsive Politics. The other two trade groups that joined Pruitt in April similarly ramped up spending. The National Automobile Dealers Association shelled out a record $4.8 million on lobbying last year, and the Association of Global Automakers increased its lobbying expenditures by nearly 50% to $3.5 million. The demands showed a marked shift from 2012 when automakers, two of which had just received massive taxpayer-funded federal bailouts, agreed to increase standards after months of negotiations with federal and California regulators. But by 2016, fuel prices had fallen from a record high national average of $3.60 per gallon 4 years earlier, and Americans were once again buying gas guzzlers. Automakers insisted the landscape had changed. In April, the EPA agreed. In a 38-page finding, the agency repudiated the Obama administration's consideration of the social cost of carbon, the health and environmental damage caused by emissions, and energy security valuation. Trucks and SUVs are more profitable to automakers. General Motors earns $35,000 in profit for each $73,000 Cadillac Escalade it sells, according to the Detroit News. By contrast, electric vehicles are generally half as profitable as cars with combustion engines, a Daimler executive admitted last year. Oh, Lord. It's just a money go round. 3 weeks after the EPA said it would revise fuel economy standards, Ford, reporting a $1.7 billion quarterly profit, announced plans to discontinue all but two car models in favor of SUVs and trucks. The intense focus on large, fuel-hungry vehicles comes amid a rapid shift toward electric and fuel-efficient cars in Japan, the European Union, and China, the world's largest auto market. China's electric vehicle market is growing twice as fast as the United States, and regulators in Beijing are considering banning combustion engines. Go China. The auto companies are whistling past the graveyard that is the Chinese auto industry when they cease making efficient cars and switch over to mostly gas-guzzling SUVs and trucks, said Daniel Becker, the director of the Washington-based Safe Climate Campaign Center for Auto Safety. It will pose problems for them even in the United States when gas prices do eventually rise. He blamed low demand for electric vehicles on the auto industry, which spends roughly $15 billion a year on marketing that promotes pickup trucks and SUVs, including coveted and costly Super Bowl time slots. Of course they do. A study published in December in the journal Nature Energy found dealerships were dismissive of EVs, misinformed shoppers on vehicle specifications, omitted EVs from the sales conversation, and strongly oriented customers toward petrol and diesel vehicle options. But it's the oil industry that may stand to gain most from the Trump administration's new fuel economy rules. This is one of the most destructive policies in terms of increasing emissions. Thursday's proposal could instigate an even bigger legal fight. 13 states have now adopted California's rules, representing nearly 40% of the U.S. vehicle market. Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. California is among 20 states that vowed Thursday to sue the administration to block the proposal. Please do. Yeah. Big fat thumbs down to the Trump administration for this crap. Yeah, on the whole, it is rather a shit show. If there are any silver linings, they are very, very dim indeed. Love peace negotiations, love talk about denuclearizing countries, but while everything else is falling apart, it is kind of hard to get excited about all of that. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. And thank you all for your wonderful comments. And thank you all for your wonderful donations that I've received over the last few weeks. I really, really appreciate it. It totally, totally helps me. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.